I'm No Dummy. This is First Take with Kelly Asbury, author of Dummy Days. Are you all set?
I'm all ready.
Good.
Go for it.
When did your interest begin in ventriloquism?
Well, that goes back to the early 60s for me. I was a kid, 1966. I remembered back in the early 60s, there were these television commercials with Jimmy Nelson and Farfel the dog. And they did the Nestle's chocolate commercials where Jimmy would, sing N-E-S-T-L-E-S, Nestle's makes the very best. And then Farfel would say his famous chocolate, then his jaw would slap shut. And I was very young, but I remembered those. And there was another character that Jimmy had called Danny O'Day. And Farfel and Danny were sort of sidekicks. And I was just big fans of those commercials on Saturday mornings when I was a kid. And at one point in my life, around some Christmas when I was maybe 6 or 7, that same period of time, my aunt gave me the Sears catalog and she said, circle whatever you want. And I saw a Danny O'Day doll that I could get from Sears. And it came with a record from Jimmy Nelson called Jimmy Nelson's Instant Ventriloquism for the Beginner. So I wanted that. And I got that for Christmas. And I loved those dolls, and I played with them, and I just tried to be a ventriloquist, never was very good at it. Grew up years later, found those dummies when I was about 35, 36 years old, and I started just wondering, wow, whatever happened to Jimmy Nelson, and is he still performing? And I ended up tracking him down on the internet and contacted him through email, and we became friends. And that's sort of where it got rekindled for me. I was a lifelong fan of Jimmy Nelson. I certainly never thought when I was a kid that I would ever meet him. And I did. And now we're friends. Well, there's certainly, I grew up watching Edgar Bergen was on television a lot in his older years when I was growing up. I always enjoyed him with Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd. I was a huge fan of Jimmy Nelson, of course, who had Danny O'Day and Farfel. Sherry Lewis, with Lamb Chop and Hush Puppy and Charlie Horse were always, when I was a kid, huge influence on me when I was very young. I loved puppets as well. And Senior Wences was always on the Ed Sullivan Show. So those were probably the ones I remembered from childhood. As I got older, I became introduced to Paul Winchell with Knucklehead Smith and Jerry Mahoney, a really genius ventriloquist who innovated the use of hands and did all sorts of things with his dummies that sort of broke the fourth wall, if you will, with ventriloquism and the normal stuff that you were seeing. He was doing more with it. Nowadays, Jay Johnson, I think he's fantastic. Willie Tyler, of course, is a classic ventriloquist, kind of bridged the old school and the new school, I think, both of those guys. Today, Jeff Dunham is a good friend of mine and also just really a fantastic performer with his characters Peanut and Jose Jalapeno on a stick, and of course Walter, who is everyone's sort of crotchety old uncle. So those are the guys I think I look at today and really enjoy the most. Well, as I met Jimmy Nelson and he started telling me about his show business career, particularly when he was young in the 40s and into the 50s when television was new. And he was really there, and so were a lot of these guys. They were there during this really exciting time when this new medium was sort of taking hold. And ventriloquists, I think, like puppeteers in those days, prior to animation sort of taking over children's programming in the 60s, puppets were sort of an on-camera special effect. And they were used a lot in the 50s. You had Howdy Doody. Jim Henson got his start in the early 60s doing this. There were, Bill Baird did some television shows. There were a lot of puppeteers on television. And I just started thinking as I talked to Jimmy, the backdrop of his entire career was this introduction of this new medium. And there were so many stories he told that I thought, there's got to be a book about this somewhere. And I couldn't find one, so I wrote one. It was as simple as that.